The Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I want to address the issue of why the Select Committee thought that 3 yearly inspections were necessary rather than 5. And it's an issue that I know vexes at least some voters out there, because I know that my office has had a repeated exchange of correspondence with someone who's somewhat offended that the Select Committee, and I see members from the National Party are probably in receipt of assiduous representations from the same person, who is somewhat annoyed that Select Committee members were influenced by advice that was given to us by Auckland City Council, who said to us that already, and they do inspect 3 yearly, already some 60% of pools, or 65% of pools, are found to be uncompliant with when inspected within the 3-year period. The presumption being that if they were inspected less regularly, if it was 5 years, for example, the number of pools that were non-compliant would be even higher, and therefore the Select Committee was convinced that there should be a 3-yearly inspection rather than 5-yearly inspection, and we thought that we should make it clear that all councils had to do that 3 yearly because there's some variation of practice around the country. And I have to say that the person who has been contacting my office to complain about that hasn't provided any other better evidence that I've been able to think would trump the evidence that we were given at Select Committee by the Auckland City Council. And given that they live in a city that they think's warm enough to have a lot of pools, although as a visitor to Auckland I struggle with that reputation, at least for the last few months, where you don't need a pool, you just need a bucket and it catches plenty of rain. I'm convinced, or I was convinced at Select Committee, that 3 years was the appropriate point. Materia Ture's amendment, as I understand it, Materia, and I haven't read the detail of the wording, but from your concerns at Select Committee, and I to take it that this is the use of natural barriers? Right, yeah. Well, I don't share Materia Ture's view on this, and I respect Materia Ture as an MP, and I accept that you're well-meaning in respect of this amendment. But if the purpose of a barrier is to stop children being able to get into a pool and be drowned, doesn't concern me whether that barrier is a natural barrier, a wall or a fence, so long as the effect of it is the same, and that is to stop children drowning. So I'm actually in favour of the amendment which is proposed in that regard by this bill, to say that rather than necessarily having to have a fence at the top of a cliff will do if a child can't climb up the cliff and into the pool, because the child's still not going to drown. So that's why, sir, I don't support that particular amendment, and I was convinced by the advice from officials to the Select Committee that as drafted we were protecting children from drowning, because those natural barriers in those situations are just as effective as a fence, sir. I think that's probably the only thing I have to say at this time, sir.